first 3 techniques to meditate. Close your eyes. That's a technique. As long as you're focused enough to keep your eyes closed, you are doing everything that must be done.
So what would you say to folks? Like, how would you help someone who's beginning this journey?
Day 0 to day 1.
Day 0 to day 1, you got to sit. You have to. I mean, so when you're saying it's like, I just can't sit, it's like, well, then you can't do this. If you can't get up the tree to get the coconut, you don't get the coconut.
Hey there, Attention Different fam. Welcome to the Attention Different podcast. We've got a really special episode cooked up for you guys. It's uniquely special to me because it features Eben Oroz, a world-class yoga teacher with over 12 years of experience leading yoga, breathwork, and meditation practices across the US, Central and South America, Europe, and India. Eben also happens to be my breathwork and meditation coach and guide. He holds a master's degree in counseling psychology and is driven by a deep interest in executive functioning and the meditative mind, but ultimately, at his core, Eben is a yogi. He sees the mind as a vast, dynamic, and essential frontier, and yoga as the most powerful and exhilarating path towards improved executive functioning, personal agency, and what he calls existential strength. The ability to remain psychologically composed under the weight of life's inevitable chapters of stress and suffering. Eben's work focuses on refining and simplifying the most effective elements of traditional yogic practices into an accessible post-traditional system, what he calls the innerly Hatha Yoga sequence. This structured approach integrates meditation, breathwork, and physical postures into a cohesive 50-minute circuit. Now for the mushy personal stuff. I was dragged unwillingly to Eben's apartment the first time I experienced his practice. I thought breathwork and even meditation were both a little too woo-woo for me. I was wrong. After that first 30-minute discovery session, I never turned back. And I've been working with Eben for years. The profound, empowering, and awakening and uplifting effects of breathwork and meditation on my ADHD brain. They're not indescribable, but they're kind of hard to capture if you haven't tried it for yourself yet. So we're trying to help you do that today. Everybody, we're so thrilled. Aaron and I have Eben Oroz in the studio. Welcome to the Attention Different podcast. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Attention Different podcast. My name is Stephen Tonti, and hosting today with me is
Aaron Smith.
Aaron, my co-founder of Attention Different, and also the brains in the room. Just kidding. Today, Aaron and I are so thrilled to have a brother of mine, both in soul and spirit, and also in mind and philosophy, and in breathwork and meditation. There's no both there. There's just a bunch. My brother Eben is here, a practitioner of yoga and specifically pranayama, something that we will get into very soon here. But I just wanted to first give a glorious intro to Eben and then ask him a little bit about this topic we're going to be discussing today. So I met Eben a number of years ago now in California when a partner of mine at the time dragged me kicking and screaming to this breathwork guy. I thought it would be more woo-woo LA stuff. I was shocked and pleased to discover that it was, in fact, LA woo-woo stuff, but the woo-woo that I needed. It was breathwork and meditation. It was my first breathwork session ever. And since then, over 5 years ago, I've been practicing with Eben on and off for those years. And breathwork and meditation, something that we're going to talk about today, pranayama, has dramatically improved my life and my thriving with adult ADHD. So we figured it would be a wonderful opportunity at the top of this year to bring Eben in and talk about his practice and his work and how it might apply to all of you out there listening and watching. So without further ado, before we get into the backstory stuff, Eben's and sort of how he got here, I would like you first to define for us pranayama. What is this word? What does it mean?
The sort of most accurate breakdown would involve 2 definitions. Prana means energy, vaguely, and cosmically. And then yam means to restrain or control. But the riddle within the word itself, just the way Sanskrit, this ancient language, kind of happens, you can play with compound words. So pranayam, yam means to control, but ayam, that A in front of the yam, is generally like a negation term. So the negation of control is like to liberate. And so pranayam can be conceived of as pranayam, control energy, to therefore pranayam, free your energy. And so the word, for me, it's indicative of the kind of like counterintuitive nature of life on an existential level, where to impose control kind of leads to personal freedom, in this like self-development space. And that the most free people I've encountered generally went through a chapter and have embodied this rigorous self-control. And so when those two concepts of like yam and ayam, or control and freedom, really start to be perceived as truly two sides of the same coin, I think you really get what pranayam means as a breathwork exercise, but also the philosophies in it and how that applies to sort of like the self-development journey.
So when you say control, are you talking about controlling your breath?
So when I say control, I think that the intrigue around yoga and like subcategories of techniques is this leap that's made between like how it literally expresses itself through like a technique or an exercise, and how that kind of gets catapulted into this, I say existential, but it's sort of like this overarching personality or mental shift. And so when I mean control, it depends on like what position we're talking about. In practice, practically the control of the breath is like regulating either the rhythms or the intensity or the volume of your breathing. But that game with the understanding of the context tends to lead to, an advancement in mental control. And that's the whole gist of yoga, and kind of what I'm trying to, as a teacher and practitioner, clarify a bit more than what has been clarified from like previous generations, including the hippies, like that generation, which did a lot of legwork. That there is a correlation, but back to your question, the control that pranayama is talking about is literally, do you have control over your inhales? Do you have control over your exhales? That can express itself differently. You can speed them up, you can slow it down. And then, more subtly, do you have control over the time that you are not breathing, which is, a completely equivalent aspect of breath to yogis. And the more sort of physical control you have over those four functions, inhales, not breathing, exhales, and then not breathing when your lungs are empty, that's going to lead to an expanse in energy. And that's going to lead to a capacity to interact with your mind a bit more coherently.
Interesting.
This to me actually is a perfect segue into the next question, which you'll note that we're kind of working from forwards to backwards, which is a book that I read in college. So we're starting with where are you now, and kind of at this one pinnacle of your work and your practice. But I'm sure there are many mountains and valleys to get here, and we'll come to that. So the Innerly method, this is your method, or this is your company, this is your breathwork practice, meditation practice. You talk about the 4 levels of the Innerly method. And I heard a lot already coming from that description of pranayama. Could you just walk our listeners and viewers through, if they were to join Eben Oroz at the Innerly method, what they can expect from those 4 levels in the practice?
The overarching sort of effort is yoga works. One of my favorite quotes is, yoga is not an ancient myth buried in oblivion. And what that's sort of speaking to is the myth of enlightenment, or the myth that, someone could achieve such peace within themselves is in fact not a myth. It's not a joke. And that, at least according to this culture, which is ancient and also current, is that if you do these physical things, you're going to get this reality. I believe in those techniques, and that's, necessary, but to not only simplify them, but to also make them more effective in the simplifying. And so with that, the Innerly method is it's like a set sequence, a set protocol for the different limbs, or the most important, I think, limbs of yoga, which are a set protocol for poses. So that means it's the same sequence every time. It's a set protocol for pranayama, or for breathwork, which means despite the fact that there are many, many, many breath techniques, and that's up to the individual to explore. For me personally, I've kind of reduced it to 4, and their arrangement and the time that you spend in each one is, again, just like that organized, simplified, hopefully made more effective approach to breathwork. And then the same goes for meditation. And so with that, you could expect to have sort of this very clear, very consistent strategy for poses, breathing strategies, and then like mental exercises. And all that together is Innerly yoga.
Very cool. We could start some of this Eben's backstory real quick. So I wanted to imagine this sort of like a table of contents in the book Eben's Journey to teaching pranayama and breath work. So if we were to read those table of contents, there'd be the highlights, right? Do you have some key stops along the way that you'd like to speak on that got you to the Innerly method and breathwork and pranayama? What brought you here?
Yeah, absolutely. Just before that, it's interesting that I think all of us kind of reflect on our lives in these ways, and we organize them into something like a novel, something like a story, and we all have our chapters. So I've done this many times, just like personally, or my mind has. And I would say the first thing that I can say that influenced this sort of approach is, like a brief 4 years in mixed martial arts, and like pursuing that right out of high school, and learning what's like a competitive professional athlete, what that world is like, and dipping my toes in that, and the rigor and the discipline of reaching that sort of like level of athleticism had a huge impact on me in terms of like my state of mind, my sense of confidence. And so that was like the beginning, like 18, 19, 20, of like, the way I manage my body has an impact on my state of mind.
It was a realization for you, kind of like learning to move with or control some of those aspects with the discipline in that martial art category, kind of like prepped you in a way, or primed you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's like, as I get older, and like, I can see more clearly the impact that had. In the moment, it was obvious in a certain way, but kind of unconscious. And now, especially when I'm like reflecting on the story, it's like, oh yeah, like just sitting there and, kicking or punching a pad 200 times because the coach told me to do it 200 times, and having that experience of, from the first time to the 200th time, there's this whole sort of journey of kind of warming up and being uncomfortable or being new to this technique, and then feeling a sense of power and feeling like this sweet spot of understanding and capacity. And then, you start to fatigue, it all starts to break down, and then you just keep doing this over and over.
And confronting the pain, confronting the discomfort.
Mm-hmm. And pushing for the goal, and seeing how, session after session, practice after practice, you start to, recognize correlations between how your body feels and how confident you are when you are or are not, when you're sparring, or like there's a more like live drill. And so that's like the fledgling moments of, like my body and my mind, and the emotions kind of in between are influence each other intensely. And so, from there, that kind of fell through. I wasn't really interested in going further down that path. Went to grad school, interested in the mind, and, really sort of sophisticated my understanding of personality and mental health. And
what did you study in grad school?
Counseling psychology. And so, learning to speak and communicate and listen to and identify emotions and specific pathologies. And so it was during that time that I was introduced to yoga and to meditation. And it was this, sort of very coherent evolution of an interest, which was really like, if I look back, it was always just me and my humanness and my relationship between myself and what my mind had to say about it and what my body had to say about it. So once I got into the meditation and yoga, the exotic nature of that whole world and the culture and the antiquity of that was much more alluring than, just like this Western, sort of more, I don't want to say cold, but sort of like medical approach.
Yeah, clinical is the word that comes to mind.
Yeah, and it's like, and in that there's government and, the reality of getting out of grad school and what that career would have been. And just sort of the image of malas or spreadsheets, like ancient Indian temples, or like an addiction rehabilitation facility somewhere. Like I was just, for whatever reason, innately pulled to like, I think this is a similar effort in the end. And this, historic and exotic path is a lot more alluring. So I just, head first went into that. And so from there, I got a teacher training, and I would say, that was kind of like not much in the story of yoga and breathwork, the actual yoga studio. but it did create a springboard to jump into India. And so
that's funny. That is funny. You've said something beautiful and so respectful, and then also beautiful and somewhat disrespectful, which I love. Like back to back, it was like beautiful and respectful of grad school. It was clinical, it was academic. But here's this other thing that I think holds a similar intention over the long arc, right? Peace, self-love, restoration. But I feel more of a temple rather than a lab, right? And then to be like, yeah, so at the yoga studio where I got my licensing, that wasn't really where I found yoga. So, but that propelled you, it sounds like.
Yeah, and so there's absolute value to, for me, like getting to that starting line, but at the same time, it's completely valueless if that starting line is where it ends also. And so while it was a powerful beginning, that's all it was just like this big, like, there is yoga. And then from there, getting into India and really just sort of desperate and eager for, the personal, like, pursuit of meaning, the belief in truth, the belief that I could, like, establish a relationship with life itself, very mystical in a lot of ways, drove my curiosity. So I had some great times in India, came back and just sort of like played the yoga teacher career, teach at these studios, teach some retreats, build a community, go back to India, feed my own practice. And I did that for about 10 years. And, year after year, just kind of really trying to, again, I believe in this. I've had beautiful experiences with these techniques and this practice and this culture, but I also understand how, to no fault of its own, it's kind of cryptic. The instructions with the most authority are also the most ambiguous because they're coming from an old time that spoke in metaphors in a different world. And so my effort has been, again, to kind of fill in the gaps, to really make it a coherent and a polished, for the modern practitioner, approach to mind management. And that's where I think, this huge crossover between, ADHD and neurodiverse people and yoga actually comes from. It's the same effort. That's kind of where I'm at now, is just trying to maintain that exploration and trying to keep all that stuff alive in myself and build a brand and, really this effort to, and I say this with, like, I have no feeling about this, but like, to commercialize a very sincere expression of what I like to say is the greatest human skill that no one ever really taught me.
With that note, Aaron.
So it seems like your journey through grad school took you to this place where, you were exploring the mind, you were exploring mental conditions and how those manifest in people. But then you realized along the way that there was something lacking in terms of the way that Western establishments treat this and how they look at it in those prescribed methods of dealing with mental health. And it opens you up to seeing this ancient practice, the more Eastern kind of way of approaching the mind and the body, and how you're treating kind of mental wellness or mental well-being, but you're doing it from a different modality, a different method. Would that be fair to say?
I would say that's fair to say. And in that, different culture, it is a different modality. But at the same time, as I speak to colleagues and friends, or sort of just reference or listen into professionals that stayed on that sort of more westernized approach, that in the end, it's all very, 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 very similar. It looks similar on one foot, but at least where I am now, it's the same fundamental question, which is, a person realizes they have a mind and they have a body and they care about their life. And the question is, how do I govern myself in a way that makes me, happier, more peaceful, more capable? And in the end, and the reason I kind of try to highlight that it's not different, is that in the end, there's really only so much you can do. It's more similar than different to me, the Western and Eastern paths, despite the surface differences.
Well, but I'll ask you, because I think there's probably a lot of our listeners might be thinking this too. Like, there's an approach to medicate it and kind of forget it in the West, right? Just throw some pills at it and that will help. And I'm not saying this to be anti-medication, right? I think if that's what you need, if that's what's serving you, and then that's, your path of healing. But what I'm saying is, like, I think there's this approach of, like, we just try to not go deeper than that we just stay with the surface level of treat the symptom and not the core root problems.
I'm glad you brought that up, because my approach to health and life and managing my own well-being is, I guess, so far from that, the medication of the mind, and that I didn't even think about that in terms of the West and the East. The medicating, very different approach. And as you said, there's value. There's, some minds are very off in terms of away from standard. And that's a lot to manage. And so, yes, the complete sort of like chemical control that pharmaceuticals creates, I think in the long run is diminishes the individual over time. If, as you said, the other branches of developing personal agency in respect to anything, whether it's my own mind, my body, a circumstance, if those conversations aren't taking place, then the potential growth, long-term growth, I think can be questioned. And it kind of reminds me of, what we just talked about, which is, I'm not sure if it's breath work that does it all, or if it's the philosophies within breath work that you can't separate that from a yogi or a practitioner, that actually feeds a belief system that then enables an individual to interact with either themselves or their mind or their situations a little differently. I would like to say that I would hope it's purely physical, but you can't enmesh that. And so I think to be safe, if I approach my own personal control for my personal freedom, I must include the philosophies. I must include belief systems. I must tinker with that as well. And
I think that's necessary too. And I think coming from a place of psychology or the clinical perspective here for a moment too, I think in the clinical realm, we'd call that kind of where are your core beliefs and that construct there, the paradigm that you're working from. If you believe, I have clients who tell me, that they're depressed and they believe that they can't shift out. How can I control my thoughts? How can I feel so powerless to this whole thing? And it's not that, what I try to work with them and tell them is we can develop a different relationship with our thoughts. There can be this shift between, trying to overly control our thinking, stop our thoughts. Don't think that. That's bad. That's negative, or whatever we're trying to push away. But then there's also kind of a shift of because obviously that doesn't work, right? To just tell yourself, stop thinking this. But if you utilize your breath, if you utilize other techniques, then I think it plays well with the mind, that the mind has a way of, if you believe in this, if you can adapt a certain type of philosophy or principle behind why you're, approaching it this way, then you have an opportunity to open yourself up to experience. And I think in psychology, we'd call that kind of exposure therapy. And I think that in a sense, breath work is kind of doing that. Would you say that?
Oh, what I would say in terms of correlating yogic techniques to modern sort of therapeutic approaches, I mean, they're all there, right? Because it's just a different culture kind of looking at the same situation. But fundamentally, yes, there's a huge correlation between yogic techniques and exposure therapy. The one difference is, if you're scared of roaches or you're scared of snakes, for example, that's a particular object or
a phobia
stimulus. Mm-hmm. And yogis are that's kind of dealing with symptomology. Your fear is not really, again, your fear isn't really snakes or cockroaches. It's really fear itself. That what you need to condition isn't my relationship with that. It's my response to that. And so all fear then gets redefined. And this is sort of where innerly or my interpretations, you could say, might skew from more traditional and more sort of grounded legacy sort of sects of yoga and Buddhism. But I think it's the same thing, which is that the fear it's not the roach, it's not the snake. The fear to your conscious mind is the contraction. That's what proves the fear. The second your muscle tightens up, wherever it is, There it is. That's the fear. The second your breath pauses or stiffens because muscle tension. And so what's kind of like phenomenal to me is that this great breadth of enemies and threats that exist out there, yogis sort of saw that it was, and took it in a very serious way, that it's my perception of it. But I can't control my mind, as you noted. So really the only place where I can intervene in this sort of like reoccurring sort of stress dream, any moment that stresses us out is in my flesh, is in my body. And so in that, I think it's adaptive just to say, it's not the cockroach, it's tension that is fear. It's a dysregulated breath that is fear. That is what fear is. That's when it gets into me. And therefore peace or calmness or, the goal of the exposure therapy is not the presence or absence of that thing, that roach or that snake, but is literally the tensionless body, is literally a very calm breath, ideally a very calm breath and tensionless body that is now habitual, meaning I don't even think about it. My body is trained to not react anymore. And that moment, or that the capacity to get there where your body doesn't flinch, essentially, to either the moment or, more technically, it's your thoughts again of the moment. But that's the state that I think people are expecting to get to. And that takes a really long time, to train an organism to not flinch, literally not flinch, is a lot of exposure therapy.
And you're just doing it on different levels. It's kind of like yogis are kind of looking at it from this place of, well, what is that initial moment that I tense up or that switch happens? It's not necessarily, it could be, the impetus could be something in the environment, but it's really in my body. My body has this switch, that flips. And if I can retrain that, so I don't have this startle response or whatever it is, then, that gives me a better sense of kind of control or a way to intervene.
Yeah, as the representation for our listeners, which I'm so comfortable being, I hope all of you are hearing right now and having fireworks go off in your head and your heart the way that they did for me, the untold power and wisdom that comes from the exchange that Aaron and Eben just had, right? Like it sounds so like simple when it's coming off your tongue, but the idea of confronting a natural fear response inside of us, such that in a patternistic way, in a practice, such that when it happens naturally in the world, our body and brain is trained to go, oh, I can handle this. Oh, I've confronted worse fear than this with my eyes shut for 90 minutes during a practice, right? That's power for the world of anxiety and ADHDers, for the world of ADHDers, the world of ADHDers. I mean, anybody listening to us who has that ADHD way in or any neurodiverse expression, to me, just what we just talked about is so powerful. Is so powerful.
Yeah, I would say that's like, again, it's like, over a decade of pretty seriously exploring yoga as seriously as I could have done it in 10 years.
Amen. Amen. No judgment here.
It's like, I tried to understand. I'm still, in love with the process, but, for it to be reduced to, a couple things, and we'll get to this later, but I guess just like foreshadowing now that the great solution, I think, to the existential suffering, we all exist on an existential level. We all question our position as an individual in relationship to life itself. And I think that's perfect. And that relationship itself creates a lot of stress. And I think subconsciously our mind is positioned alongside nature itself. It's like this uncontrollable, all powerful, heavily influential, organ, but also engine of my entire reality. That sitting down well, and you don't need more instructions than that, is itself a panacea for the existential identity. Like you just sit for long periods of time. So it's like an endurance behavior, but that itself is it. And then the second is that a book that was very helpful in what I'm about to say is How Emotions Are Made. I think it's by Lisa Ann Barnett. Potentially very good book about, the emergence of emotions in the mind, but that, I asked students, just to create some sort of juicy conversation. It's like, well, where is Zen lost? Where is peace lost? Where is it lost? And it's like, oh, and this and this and this and this and this moment in a bad email, all circumstantial, all external. It's like, no, and it's lost in the flinch. And so I bring up Lisa Ann Barnett, I hope that's her name, is because she kind of outlined of the way it all kind of works, neurologically, which adds credence, is that we're not even, our mind is predicting, our subconscious mind, which I think some of us might think we can get a glimpse into it, like it's some kind of translucent, mostly opaque space, but it's all opaque. You have any thought that you think might be like intuitive or like coming out of the subconscious is a conscious thought. So subconscious mind is a black box. You don't know, but you get a feeling. Your body is connected to your subconscious, so your body has a way of seeing what's going on. And so that subconscious mind is 1 millisecond ahead. It's all, even in this moment, everything is very uncontrolled. I know where I am. I know like what's happening. My mind is still predicting, and if everything goes according to plan, millisecond by millisecond, then I'm okay. But the second, something doesn't go according to plan, maybe someone knocks on the door, something very small, because I didn't predict it, my body gets tight. My body responds to all that subconscious contemplation. And then my mind, my conscious mind, registers a contraction, registers a change in my body. And then my conscious mind starts to put it all together. But it was all a derivative of subconscious theories that I have zero access to. And so the only place, the footprint, the reality, like, I'm thinking maybe like a poltergeist, like when the ghost if the ghost is in the ether, who cares? But when the ghost somehow can move my chair and scratch my walls, then it's a problem. And so
our producer real quick is saying the person's name is Lisa Feldman Barrett. Lisa Feldman
Barrett.
Barrett, there we go. Thank you. Yeah. So, the claw mark of that ghost is, again, the tension, like that little bit of tension, that little bit. And really not just saying, oh, that's a consequence of fear, but that is the fear. That is the fear. And when you're, again, if it's not habitual, if it's a conscious behavior, you're training yourself, the results your brain might expect are not going to be there because you already flinched. The second you flinched, it happens. So the practice is this decades long, that when the day comes that you do not flinch in relationship to a spontaneous pop quiz from the existential, from life, and your body's calm and your breath rate has, because you've been practicing, all of a sudden you get what if you were listening to some mindfulness books, a thought's just a thought, you get it. It's like, oh, yes, this is a problem. Yes, there will be consequences. Yes, but my heart rate has not changed. My tension is still relaxed. My breath is still calm. And because of that, your conscious mind is going to say, is it as big a problem as I'm making it out to be? And with all that, coming to fruition, it's going to give that individual a little bit of conscious space to think more openly and calmly about whatever's happening. And if they have a practice, what they'll do is they'll calm down even more.
Yeah.
And then they'll just know it.
So back up for a second, though, because I think some of our listeners might be thinking at this point, like, okay, that sounds nice, but I don't have these decades of experience, and all this time that you've invested in this practice to get to this level of discovery. A lot of people are probably listening to this and saying, well, I just don't even know how to like sit for even a few minutes,
literally,
and tolerate my brain with all of these thoughts and all these emotions. Or when my coworker or boss or someone says something critical, or my spouse says something critical, I'm flooded with emotions. There's, this rejection sensitivity or sensitivity to criticism. So what would you say to folks? Like, how would you help someone who's beginning this journey?
Day 0 to day 1. Yeah.
Day 0 to day 1, you got to sit. You have to. So when you're saying it's like, I just can't sit, it's like, well, then you can't do this. And the false statement is that I can't sit.
Well, just even believing can't, like telling yourself can't, right, is setting up an expectation that's a false expectation.
Mm-hmm. You're like, you can't, it's like when you speak, that's your mind. You just told me you can't, but I just told you that's where you got to go. So either I'm right or you're right, and if we're talking to a student and it's like, I can't, then it's like, well, then you don't get this. You don't get it. If you can't get up the tree to get the coconut, you don't get the coconut. And so, this is just kind of like a commentary with life. Is like, that's it. You have to do it. You have to. What I tell clients is, I say, let's flip the can't to can or could. Like, well, what can you do? Maybe it's hard for you. It's difficult to sit for X amount of time. But I've had clients tell me that, and I said, okay, how about this? What if I told you,
you were going to get some big reward that you know you really would want, right? Like when you say, oh, you're going to win the lottery or your perfect job or the whatever. I mean, a lot of times it's materialistic, but just because they're starting out, right? But I'm just like, if I told you were going to get $1 million right now, if you could sit for 1 minute, right? Would you do it? If I had the check, they'd find a way. They're like, oh yeah, totally, right? So I'm like, well, what can you do? Is there a way that we can shift the mind to be in this place of actualizing what in stepping into this place of I have agency to do something about this, and I'll try it out. I can test this out. Let's see if I can, and start with where you are comfortable. Start with what you can do.
And I think that goes back to the value of a teacher. A well-organized sort of like process. It's like what you can do and slowly increasing capacity. And that's kind of the pursuit with when I went back and was saying like a set sequence in Innerly, a set breathwork protocol, a set meditate is my effort of being like, it's actually quite simple. We'll just take it one technique, one skill at a time. And the other thing to appreciate is you must do it though. Like to get this result, you must get there. And there is no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I'll be patient with you. You must be patient with yourself, but there is no alternative. If your body gets tight and your breath changes, your mind will register a threat. And so you need to unravel that. There's all sorts of other nuances. That's for your body. It's not even, it's energy. It's that tension costs energy. It burns up more oxygen. That breath rate costs energy because you're not breathing as properly. And for your body, it's not really the concepts that matter. It's the energy that's lost ruminating and planning and acting out against these perceived threats. And so there's a couple variables, but it highlights the fact that the body control is imperative and that stillness is the pinnacle expression of that control, just like powerful stillness. Again, the teacher's role or the therapist's role is to help someone out. But in the end, I tell this to my clients it's better to think of this as a hobby, this mind control therapy, emotional regulation stuff versus like a doctor's visit where it's like, I go in with a symptom, they cure me.
Right.
And then it's done. It's like, no, this is more like you're interested in your mind. You're interested in your emotions. You're therefore interested in problems, therefore interested in internal, emotional, mental solutions. It kind of includes the body. That's the yoga piece. But this is a hobby.
Be curious.
Yes, be curious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Be curious and recognize that you are intrigued also, that it's not just like, I want to resolve this. That you're intrigued by the nature of yourself. And for me, people that come and they want to do privates, especially when they start to, when I notice that it's like a long-term relationship, it's like, oh, this is 1000% a hobby. So just know that. And that just lightens the space.
I love our ability collectively today to hold simultaneity in one hand, right? Because like we've just then again defined it as a practice, something that takes some discipline. If you want the coconut, you're going to have to climb the tree to get the coconut. If you want to experience what I just described after 10 years of doing this, you're going to need to sit down at some point, right? Like there's a love and a compassion there, but it's also disciplined, right? The quote that comes to me immediately is this quote from Lola Young at the end of her album, where she says very vulnerably that she thought music was the only true love she had until she started therapy, and I'm sure some meditation and breath work as well, just a guess. But since she's gone down that road, she's realized, oh, I can love my mind as much as I love music. I can love myself as much as I love music. Oh, right? And that comes to me as well as my mind can be my hobby, and that can be a joy. That can be something I'm grateful to do rather than the work, the therapy, the practice, so somehow finding a way to hold both of those truths in one hand, which is maturity, is wisdom, et cetera.
You can have a sense of a lightness and curiosity, almost like what they call it is like serious play. There's a body of research out there, right? And I love that because it's like, we're playing, we're discovering, but still coming into it with a sense of seriousness of like, okay, there will be discomfort. There will be moments of pain. There will be sensations that are not necessarily pleasant all the time, but that's okay. It's part of this whole process and the journey that we're on. If you want to advance kind of yourself and your consciousness to that next level, you have to do those things. You have to sit And it doesn't mean that you have to do it for any certain amount of time right off the bat, right? You can start with just 30 seconds, just a minute, just a few minutes. And I think a lot of times people have this misconception, I need to clear my mind. I need to have an absence of thoughts. This kind of idea that they kind of get to this Zen state or something of nothingness in their mind. And I think a lot of times the goal of meditation, and correct me if I'm off base here, but I think the goal of meditation is not to clear your mind. It's to recognize what your mind is doing, what your sensations and emotions and where the thoughts go, and bring them back to a focal point. If our mind gets distracted, like an ADHDer, if your mind gets distracted 1,000 times in 1 minute, that's actually good. That's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean you're failing. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. That actually means you strengthen that muscle. I look at it like a mental rep.
Absolutely. That term grounding or anchoring, and with that, where I'm at now, and this is like a sort of a definitional sort of linguistic change that I've been applying for students to help them with that, is that meditation is not a mental action. Nirvana is not an emotional or intellectual understanding. I think a lot of people, when they see someone like the Buddha, they're like, oh, he's in this like emotional space, or he has this understanding. And the reality is, it is a physical game. It is a physical practice. And the mind's going to do what the mind does, like any other sport, any other physical game. But with the sports, it's very obvious. Mind is secondary to what how I'm swinging this bat, how I'm catching this ball. With meditation, it's a little bit more convoluted because of the essential nature of the practice, but how it's communicated. And so when it's reframed as this is a physical thing, and you got to reframe a lot of it. You can't just say that. You got to speak to the whole process entirely differently.
Yeah. For our listeners, I'm sure all of you have seen some kind of meme or video representation. Sometimes it's a stand-up comedian who has ADHD who tells a joke or a bit about meditation, and they're all the same. They are all exactly the same. It's an individual trying to sit down, but their ADHD brain talking to them, and then all of a sudden their thoughts become circular. They're not even having questions or doubts about the meditation. They're thinking about conversations with friends at brunch. And by the end of the cute video, it comes back and they're like, how long was that? Oh my God, only a minute. Ha 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 ha, right? I've seen this 8 different ways, 8 different influencers. I would love to talk more practically and more radically accepting about that experience, right? I've sat down, I closed my eyes, I'm a minute to 3 minutes in, my brain's just going.
Right? I mean, for me, when that kind of comes up, again, it was framed under this idea that, immediately when working with someone, like first day, meditation, I know you think, even if you don't know you think, but you think meditation is a mental thing or an emotional thing. And generally people are like, yes. And it's like, no, it's physical. And you got to keep saying that because it's just ingrained in our heads that it's this mental, and the result, therefore, is mental. It's like, no, it's physical. Okay. In that, the techniques are very simple. Instead of sitting down for 10 minutes and trying to control your thoughts, as someone instructing you, if it's not physical, I don't need to tell you much about your mind. I just got to tell you what you got to do with your body. And so I break it down into 6 techniques. 3 are external, 3 are internal. The first 3 techniques to meditate: close your eyes. That's a technique. Oh, okay. Sit up straight. That's a technique. And do not move anything. 3 external techniques. The ego is a mental. It's an identity. It's a thought. It's an algorithm of thoughts and memories that
it's a construct.
We've all organized as ego. And from that book, Lisa Ann Barrett. But she says the human brain is capable of many minds. So we have multiple identities. So multiple egos, many things, many egos must be managed. And so anything that involves the mind will involve this identity. And the act of disavowing the mind for a second, doesn't matter what you're thinking. Doesn't matter how focused you think you are as a concept or not. As long as you're focused enough to keep your eyes closed, you are doing everything that must be done.
Right.
The quality of your mind is irrelevant. It's physical, as long as you're doing that. As long as you're sitting up straight enough so that you are not asleep, you're good. As long as you are not moving, you're good. And in that, the mind's being in control. And in that, there's this sort of subtle ego dying. And that creates a lot of power in an individual. Yeah. The second or the next set of techniques are also 3, but they're internal. I can't really see someone do it, but release tension is a technique. Slow down your breathing. So take more time inhaling, more time exhaling, and then breathing less air. Right, so not breathing all the way into the chest, just like very normal, smaller rather than greater breaths. And that has this tendency of like sedating the physical body. And so as long as those 6 techniques, again, very simple, are happening, you're in the meditative process. You're learning to not flinch. Again, just the very stern, blatant, repeated reframe that this is not a mental activity. That I think is the key, because then they slowly, after hearing that, are like, it doesn't even matter what my mind is, whether it's this or that. My eyes are closed. Yeah. Check.
So what would they do if they got, like Stephen just said, like their mind starts to race and they find themselves off on a train of thought? They're thinking about what they're going to do next and what they did in the past. What then?
So for me, in like a literal sort of, I would be watching them, and I just make sure that their eyes are closed, that they're not moving. If they open their eyes, they lost a point. They took a step back. And so you just get back to it. Okay, cool. Close your eyes again. Sit up straight. Don't move. And so it's just constantly almost like not avoided, not bypassed, but it truly, at least in my approach now, is irrelevant. And so whether they have or haven't, the problem that I would address is you opened your eyes, or you moved, or your posture collapsed, and that's what you got to check.
So it seems like just the emphasis is not on whatever the nature of the thoughts are. You're just having them come back to their physical being.
Because that itself is a habit. That itself will lead to more contemplating of concepts.
Just real quick, from user experience, this is from the user manual, I can confirm exactly the way Eben is describing this as I reflect exactly my journey. Early days from 0 to 1, ADHD brain on fire. The first thing that distracted me from a million thoughts was we were doing breathwork technique, bellows breath, and my hands in the mudras started to kind of collapse on themselves. My muscles were contracting because of the intense over-oxygenating or over-carbon dioxygenating process, right? Pumping my body full of CO2 versus, so suddenly it was very physical. Quite literally the first distraction from my internal monologue was, whoa, my hands, right? And from that day 0 onward, it is exactly as Eben describes. Early days, it was all, hey, your eyes opened. Hey, your posture is crumbling. Hey, sit up straight in the posture. Hey, your legs, your feet. The more that we worked in a practice over the years, over that physical, the more mental nuance and highfalutin ideas, the big higher concepts mentally and philosophically, they come along with that, but it does really start with physical. And it's a lot of repeated physical checks.
And I'll just plug here real quick. If you're interested as a listener to go and hear more about specific breathwork techniques, Stephen does do a great job kind of giving an overview of these in our lab episode on this. So look for our breathwork lab, ADHD lab.
Yeah, I'm channeling a lot of Eben. Thank you, Aaron, during that. And I, to get to that point where it felt very comfortable for me in that space, it comes from the here's a big word that I love, inculcating, right? We sort of beat this into ourselves over the years, these concepts. And even now, when I go to the gym and I try and get to the steam room and meditate for 10 to 15 minutes every day when I go to the gym, a lot of my thought process, and this is from a guy who's been doing this for 5 years now, 6 years now, a lot of my process is, what's my posture? Am I connected to the breath with my body, rather than, oh man, I can't stop thinking about this new album that I love, or oh man, I have this many things to do on my to-do list today. Those thoughts enter and swirl around and leave. And in a weird, maybe perverse way to some of our listeners, I now look at that as, oh, it's working. I've created this space where I can watch those thoughts come in and go. There's a chatter brain that for my ADHD self is going constantly. And then there's this other voice that sort of comments on that. And then there's the voiceless consciousness, right?
Your observing mind.
Yes, the observing mind, I find actually in that perverse way some of our listeners might not be expecting or ready for. At the point in my practice when I see those thoughts, those words and those ideas, they're allowed in the room. Make a cup of tea, made a pot of tea, invite them in. They're allowed. But what I'm my B voice is doing, my observing voice is talking about my posture, is talking about the practices, is checking in, and it's much more slower and calm.
And I think this is probably the differentiation here. So what I kind of described is more of an insight meditation, Vipassana, Buddhist approach. And I think what Eben is describing is a little bit more of your yogic approach to things. And obviously yoga has a lot more of, you're working on consciousness development through the body as the vessel versus I think Buddhism on the one hand is kind of a little bit more of, you do more of a mental exercise in a lot of the techniques with insight meditation.
I'm not too familiar with insight, but this is, I mean, just like where I'm at, and I think it was a powerful reframe. Of course, it like maybe it has to be said, maybe it doesn't, but Buddhism and yoga, and it's just this long, enormous culture across generations and millennia, and so there's a lot of different approaches, and it's hard to say what is or what isn't yoga or Buddhism. But I would say, just with experience from Vipassana and yoga, both have techniques that are specifically oriented towards the mind. And most of it involves like learning to repeat like a thought or contemplate through. And so I try to highlight for students, philosophizing doesn't necessarily make you a philosopher. To think weakly, in a disorganized way about confounding thoughts is not necessarily what a philosopher does. A philosopher, just like, an alpinist, they make it to the summit and they do everything they can and they gather the skills to hit the goal. The painter finishes the painting. And so a philosopher, will stretch their mind until they get the aha. Until, even if it's only within themselves, they think until the epiphany. And so in terms of like Buddhist and yogic meditative techniques, there are mental techniques, visualizing and mantra fundamentally. And I do employ them, but both also have this physical practice. When I look at it, most of the time from the highest caliber practitioners, meaning whether Hindu and yogic or Buddhist, even Christian, like the hermits and Judaism, the mystic hermit, the fellow, the person that went away and did the stuff and then comes back and like talks about it, they're often more revered and more highly regarded, even within the orthodoxy, than, let's say, swamis and brahmins that just rose up the orthodoxy and kind of like hit the, that's not generally who we hear about through stories or books or more historically epics. We hear about the person that trailblazed on their own. And what those people tend to do is generally a very physical practice. And so that's kind of why I was hitting that they all describe it as a mental, like they describe it as a mental experience because they're describing the consequences of what was actually a physical. And just to, to highlight, I don't think this is so well known. I'm not sure if it's in Buddhism, but certainly within yogic stuff, you'll get a scholarly sort of set of sutras, instructions, and they will intentionally put wrong instructions or intentionally take out key techniques to confuse the would-be person who happened to come along this and maybe wants to teach it or learn it for themselves. And so there's this impetus within the culture to be like, you got to come to me, guru, or and you got to learn the thing from me. And so all of that is to say that it's again a very physical effort, and the more I have, whether it's accurate or not, the more I have kind of shaved off the idea that it's mental at all, has led to more clarity and control. It has improved the expected consequence. And so for this podcast and this community, it's like it's a reframe. It's a huge reframe, but to consider that neurodivergent, the solution to that has nothing to do with your mind and has everything to do with like not even the subtle body, like, what the medicines play on, but the gross body. It has, your power is in your muscle fibers and in your breath rate. And to consider that attention period, hyper or deficit, whatever that, irrelevant, is a physical experience. Again, counterintuitively does a lot.
I do think there is a huge amount of value. And I think no matter what the approach, we can come at it from different angles. And the main takeaway here for the people listening is like, really, you have to experience it for yourself and you have to figure out what works for you. So what works for Eben, what works for me, what works for Stephen, what may work for you might look different, might feel different. Yeah. And for your perceptions and your experience, what you pay attention to, if you're paying attention to a certain aspect of your body or a certain breath rate or a certain place where you feel your breath on the tip of your nose, it kind of doesn't matter. It becomes inconsequential at some level. If that helps you to kind of deepen your awareness and get into a state that is helping you just feel more at peace and kind of, satisfied in the present moment, test it out. Test out various types of techniques, breathwork techniques, whatever works for you. It can be all part of this process. So I don't think there's any one way. There's no one path that's better. Obviously, Evan's speaking from his experience and what is working for him and what he's seen with his students. But we got to try out what works for us. Yeah.
I can empathize, and I think who can say whether there is or isn't like a one path for individuals. But as, an enthusiast, really kind of, again, being swift with thoughts, it's like, we're vastly similar. We're all vastly, vastly similar. And it's hard to believe for me that whether someone can or cannot do it is another question. But it's hard to believe that in terms of our similarity as organisms, that what would work for one would not work for the other, unless there's kind of faulty expectations, or maybe we're starting off a little more nervous or a little more sort of, excitable in the mind. But, whether there's a ton of rust or a little bit of rust on a piece of metal, if you want to clean the rust, it's the same process. You just got to do it a little bit longer. So I believe that stillness and releasing muscle, this is what I've reduced, and slowing down your breath, that's it, fundamentally, will work for everyone. And I just hold that belief because in the end, back to the energy, we lose control when we don't have our energy right. And peace is the same for our bodies. Tension is not peace. Arrhythmic breathing is not peace to our organism. And so when we condition and empower this capacity and build out a space where those physical expressions are being nurtured, the result is, I would say, inevitable and imminent. And with that, again, how it relates to ADHD is it's an energy thing, subconscious again. But, I don't know, I imagine it would be true, but when anyone is depleted of energy, whether they're losing it because their muscles are tight all day, because they're nervous about this all day, because they're not taking care of their diet, because they're not sleeping, whatever it is, when the energy is low, the mind tends to be less controllable, therefore perceived to be more excitable. It can't be directed. And the capacity to regulate ourselves diminishes. And so not only is this act of sitting down and calming down, nurturing a propensity for a physical calm, an expression or behavior of calmness, it also conserves our energy. What I'm saying is, I think it's a more powerful and provocative idea, even though it hits our egos. And if I heard someone say this and they didn't say exactly what I was going to say, I might disagree, but that there's only one form of meditation. All other things are preparing you for meditation. Breathwork is not meditation. Breathwork prepares you for meditation. Reading about Vishnu or the Buddha is not meditation. It's just building concepts to help you meditate. But in the end, whether it's Hinduism or Jainism or Buddhism or Zen Buddhism or modern mindfulness, you look at all of it across the board, it's about sitting, being still, and closing your eyes and essentially just regulating your body in a way that is naturally calm, but an unnatural expression of that calm. And so closed eyes, generally you can have your eyes open, tall spine, do not move, be still. And you just keep doing that. And what happens? Your mind starts chirping. And because you're in this container, this physically imposed container, what you are essentially doing is you're locking yourself in with your mind. You're like, I got to deal with this. Let's close the freaking door and lock it. And I'm going to stay in with this mind. And that game is years long, and there is no shortcut.
Yeah, I'm sure our listeners are probably hearing some of that and I'm terrified of that, of spending this much time with my mind in my brain. A lot of people probably think that this is terrifying to if I was just alone with my thoughts. I have to fill that space, fill that void with all sorts of things, podcasts, music, entertainment, whatever it might be. Yeah. And I think what I would tell people is, because as a coach and a therapist, people have put way too much significance on the thoughts that they're having, and that those have meaning or purpose. So especially when they're judging themselves or judging others, I'm doing this right, I'm doing this wrong, I'm good, I'm bad, this is good, this is bad, this thing is pleasurable, this thing is displeasurable, whatever their nature of that thinking is, it comes back to well, are they placing a lot of significance on those thoughts?
Right.
And I think if we can get away from that and just allow thoughts to exist and allow our mind to wander, and we observe what happens without putting too much significance on the thoughts, because they don't all mean something. There's not always a purpose or a why, right? People get stuck on the why. Why am I thinking that? Why has this happened? What must I do about this to change it? It's like, no, you don't have to. Just let it arise and watch it dissipate. I compare it to like the weather a lot of times for clients. It's you're staring out a window and there may be a storm going on and it may be lots of activity happening. You see these storm clouds, you see this weather event happening. You can't do anything about it. You don't have to do anything. And that's how your mind is. Just a storm of thoughts and ideas and all sorts of stuff. Let it pass.
Yeah, and really, again, just to hit where, if you're looking outside and there's a storm of thunder cracks, like a little too close to home, like right overhead, what happens is the body, again, just keep hitting. It's like the body tenses up. And in that, there's this, that's real. And so when it comes to like letting go of the mind or letting go of thoughts, I think it's important to understand, well, when did you hold on to it? When did you grab it in the first place? And it wasn't when it emerged. It emerged, you grabbed onto it, and you literally grabbed onto your thoughts when your muscles tensed.
Yeah.
And you're going to need a moment, but I can share, like, I got into a pretty, I didn't get injured, but pretty devastating car accident in the LA once, at the end of it, the tail end of a lot of practice, just sort of like, for whatever reason, I was doing a lot and got destroyed, get out of the car. My friend comes, picks me up, and there's no nervousness. It's like, oh, you're probably just in shock. I was like, probably right. Get home, and it just never happens. The adrenaline dump was just super calm. And that moment really was one of those moments where I look back, it's like the situation gets real when my body subconsciously reacts to it. And when your body doesn't, when you all of a sudden realize, oh, I've conditioned myself or deconditioned myself to not flinch. When that happens and a moment arises where you have it, you do not flinch by habit, not because you got tight and then thought it through and tried to relax. That's already, you lost the point. But when it's did it on your own, your body did it on its own, then it all comes together like, oh, a thought is just a thought.
That's fascinating. Do you think there's a point, though, where that could be counterproductive? Like, let's say if you were being chased by an animal that was out to kill you or an actual threat?
There's stories like that like really go into these like crazy situations, but no, I think you will work as hard as you can just to keep that, that like sort of surface what is like first world problems sort of concept.
Yeah.
Like you're going to work so hard just to not react to first world problems.
Right. The tiger isn't really a threat to you.
Yeah, it's not going to hinder your capacity to gauge what's actually dangerous. You're just going to, and if you've practiced so intensely that true danger, explicit threat is also not, you're just kind of chilling. You will, if you're in the right country and the right person sees you, you might be placed in the realms of a bodhisattva, placed in the realms of a Buddha, because that is, kind of how the stories are projected. Like, even death came and dude was just chilling there, not flinching at all. It's like, that's the goal.
It's oxymoronic about our human condition and about our ego that everything we're discussing here. It is so obvious and fantastic that Aaron's question, also based in fear, it's a Jungian fear of like, but what if we meditate so well that we no longer recognize an actual danger and then like it kills us? Isn't that so wonderfully human and ironic to be like, but what if we get so good at this that then we now have something else to fear, like a new threat? And it's like, well, but the point is to treat all threats and fear as one thing, as a thing that has many trickle down or domino effects. It has contractions. My experience with Eben is just as he described, that I came in as an overthinker, an overactive mind, an over-observer, an over-criticizer, an just everything at 180%, right? And part of that overactive critical mind was like, well, am I perfectionizing? Am I going to get the perfect blend of science and anatomy and also Sanskrit and yogic teachings that makes me feel comfortable and safe? It all came back to comfort and safe. But along the practice with Eben and myself, there was a flip point. There was a full 180 trigger. There was a moment where I got a shit-eating grin on my face when the first thought of fear entered my mind, when the first thought of discomfort or feeling discomfort, I go, oh, yes, I'm doing the practice because I'm uncomfortable. That shift was a very poignant and important shift in embracing the discomfort, right? Embracing the reality, radically accepting the thing that just happened. When I dislocated my shoulder most recently, again, like Eben, after years of practice, was it a clean slate like Eben describes? I went from the mountain to the hospital to my house and didn't feel terror or upset or pain? No, I felt a great deal of pain, but there were moments, crystal clear moments of low stress, of my parasympathetic nervous system being activated rather than the sympathetic nervous system, the anxious and overactive, of I could talk to myself and hear myself. I could console myself. I probably gave myself an additional 30 or 45 minutes of peace and calm before the searing pain kicked in, because I was able to do a couple breathwork techniques on the sled. I was able to just that's the practical I want our audience to get, because we could spend a whole many hours talking about ego death and getting into lofty concepts of life threats and how do we take on the tiger or the lion versus the snake or your taxes or your boss being weird, right? In practical use, the act of the behavior of sitting down, of closing your eyes ritualistically as part of a practice, a hobby, right? Building the habit stack, Aaron, as we're talking about, right? Adding to your habit stack, the habit of confronting the process of fear within us directly. That's how it's defined for me, breathwork, is the process of confronting fear as it is produced at its core, at the source inside of us, right? We go to the source. There's no specific thing causing fear. It is fear itself, contraction, breath, neurochemistry. It's just activating our sympathetic nervous system, fear, because we are going right to the source of fear and confronting it, where it's literally developed in your brain and in your chest, right? And like therapy and meditation and breath work, they hold hands so firmly in this realm, right? Like that is every client who nobly comes into Aaron's practice is choosing to confront discomfort and upset and fear with a practitioner. When I sit down on the mat with Eben, same thing, right? And that choice is noble and a good one. It's a healthy and noble choice for anybody listening. I read Eben's blog this morning, reread it when preparing. And if I may, I think this could be a good way out to get into pluggables, and so much wonderful stuff has been offered here. This is a very short description on one of your blogs about meditation. And I think it gets at this idea, right? Meditation leads to a slew of insights that help us navigate life. At this point, most of us understand life is at times stressful, but the reasons for this seemingly inevitable stress are still up for debate. Yesterday, everything was good. Today, while nothing has changed, that goodness has diminished. Why? We're not talking about the pains that are the consequences of life-changing events, big or small. We're talking about those unprovoked internal shifts in our outlook that seem to arise from nothing. We can brush it off and tell ourselves that's just the way things are, and it's true. There is nothing that doesn't change. Enthusiasm, hope, and gratitude come and go, as do doubt, depression, and stress. We can also explain these ups and downs as shifts in biochemistry, like the seasons and tides, the eternal makeup of our body as a living organism moves through its emotional seasons. We can also investigate our behaviors and the delayed impact of our habits to rationalize the ups and downs of our emotional state. All are true, none are untrue. But knowing the reasons is only half the solution, right? This gets at it for me. This was just like an intro to one of your blogs, but I think this gets at it. You can spend your whole life finding out answers to the reasons for this seemingly involuntary, natural up and down that happens every day, every week, every month. We can respond to those ups and downs. We can respond to those ups and downs with a practice. And I hope that people kind of are starting to get some of that special sauce from this episode and from the more stuff we do on breathwork and meditation. It's in the radical acceptance narrative. These things happen and they often don't have an explanation at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. Why I'm suddenly feeling anxious and I can't tell why. How many of you listening have that experience? Why am I anxious? Why am I suddenly anxious? Right? This conversation and this practice is about setting that, taking that, seeing it. I see you, question and concern. I'm going to put you over here for a second. I'm going to go find my meditation pillow over there. I'm going to do this breath technique for 5 minutes, maybe 10, maybe 30. But the act of doing that is so powerful and so empowering. And I am so grateful that my thick with two C's arrogant ass got dragged to Eben's apartment so that I could experience it for myself, as Aaron put it earlier, right? For those of you listening, try this. I'm going to use your pluggables, Eben. Go to Eben Oroz on YouTube. Go to Innerly Meditation on YouTube. Eben has beautifully, wonderfully posted a lot of 30-day challenges from his company on YouTube, on his channel. So because I've just did my little soapbox, I want to leave it open to Aaron and Eben to comment, maybe leave some pluggables.
I'll just say, really quick, like in summary of everything you said, there's a quick story of the Buddha. He says, I don't care what, in a time when, there's a lot of philosophies of India trying to understand the nature of reality. Like, how does karma work explicitly? How do, if you believe in past lives, what's the algorithm essentially that determines if this is this bad act this much and you get this consequence? So they're trying to figure it out. Everyone's talking. Doesn't really know. No one knows what they're talking. And the Buddha, just reared in that is like, I don't care what it is. I don't care what laws of karma are governing whether this thing meets me on the road at this time. My job as a conscious being is to meet all things with dignity. What dignity means, is interesting, but the way I propose it to my students is sit down within the container of your practice. Just sit down. So you can't say anything. You can't do anything really. But can you spike your dignity? Can you meet this moment from the techniques with more dignity? That little puzzle of like, how do I meet a moment from meditation when I shouldn't open my eyes, when I shouldn't move, what do I do? And in that, what you'll really learn to do is meet your mind with dignity. Because you are meeting something, you're meeting your mind. And whatever answers come up, that's a byproduct of your own mind. But, I would imagine that's the way to go about it. And then just the last little bit for those that are listening, you want to, again, meditation is a long integration. So you want to think that when you start meditating, if you do it the way, Stephen kind of articulated, where there's this moment of stress and you want to like manage that. So you go somewhere and you meditate. There's this like, prolonged, almost deconstructed response. Stress happens. I register the stress. I remove myself to some capacity. I slow down. I try to remember, maybe I got to read some things. Maybe I turn on something and I calm down. And so, let's just say that's stage alpha. Stage omega is you don't have to go away to do the thing. As it comes, as the stress comes, your response of dignity, again, whatever that is immediate. It is simultaneous. And in that, the whole phenomenon of stress as a problem, as distraction as a problem, as that thing as a problem is eradicated. I just want to kind of like make it clear that it's you're learning to respond. It's one response, but at first it's a little deconstructed. You got to sit down. You got to talk about it.
That's a beautiful takeaway and a pin to put on this.
Hell yeah!
It's responding intentionally. It's responding, training yourself to respond and not just react, unconsciously react. That's essentially what it all boils down to.
Yeah.
And as the Buddha said, his final words, and I'm just paraphrasing because this is translation from thousands of years ago, but strive with diligence. And that's what we all are doing on this journey. With ADHD, with neurodivergence, it's going to be rough at times, but breathe. You got this.
All in the breath, baby.
All right.
Give us your where to find you, and not just in America, in the world.
Yeah, if you want to carry on, just my website is innerly.com. Innerly is INIRLY. It's just a take on like insideness, innerly. So that's that, blogs and access to the YouTubes. And then in terms of actual practice, retreats are the main sort of event. And so the next retreat is in Portugal in July. And then after that, 2026, Colorado, Costa Rica, potentially Peru again. So if any of those adventures call, just go to the website. There's a newsletter sign up on the page. You can sign up there, pretty standard nowadays. So be an honor to meet new friends and carry on.
Well, thank you so much for all the work you do. and for sharing your experience and wisdom with us.
Yeah, this is very much not the end of a journey. This is the beginning or the middle of an ongoing journey with Eben. I am personally and selfishly so thankful to have Eben in my life, but I am more inclined to share Eben with the world and to sort of insert him and people like him in all of your lives. These are priceless human beings. There is no price I could put over this person's head. You are a life and sanity saving individual. I'm honored by you all the time. So thank you so much by coming onto the show, and I can't wait to see you again.